but we will get a plan, and every single one of them will be done.
So, if you haven't seen it, here's the moment that Education Minister Gillian Keegan starts swearing after an interview over the issue of crumbling schools.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
Wow, that's amazing. She obviously feels underappreciated. But when the facts point out little has been done to mitigate this potential disaster, why is she asking for praise? What for? What has she done?
Determining strength of normal reinforced concrete. Determining strength of rack concrete.
Anyway, maybe Rishi Sunak can help shed light on what he is doing and how, as Chancellor, he helped to either resolve or exacerbate this issue.
Permanent Secretary at the Department for Education has said this morning that when they wanted to put more money into repairing schools, you as Chancellor didn't allow that to go ahead and in fact cut that budget. Are you to blame for what's happening now? And do you want to apologise to parents and pupils?
Now, I'm going to warn you that he is in full robot mode here, so take a deep breath as Rishi just carries on talking until you feel out of breath just listening to him.
That is completely and utterly wrong. Actually, one of the first things I did as Chancellor in my first spending review in 2020 was to announce a new 10-year school rebuilding programme for 500 schools. Now, that equates to about 50 schools a year that will be refurbished or rebuilt. And if you look at what we've been doing over the previous decade, that's completely in line with what we've always done, about 50 or so schools a year refurbished or rebuilt. That's what I announced as Chancellor in my first spending review. On top of that, I also invested £5 billion to help our kids catch up with lost learning from COVID, the Education Recovery Programme. I think you'll remember at the time that was rightly a priority of the country to help our kids who've been disrupted by COVID with extra tutoring, for example, to help them catch up. And that cost £5 billion, which I invested in as Chancellor.
Let's try that again, shall we?
But the former Permanent Secretary said 50 schools a year, yes. They had funding initially for 100. They thought the total number that needed to be done per year was 300 to 400. Prime Minister, you talk a lot about trade-offs, but isn't this simply a trade-off that if you choose to save money in this area and don't put as much money into repairing schools as senior officials ask, then you run the risk of them having to shut down because of a risk of them falling down?
Well, if you look at what we've been doing over the past decade, we've been rebuilding or refurbishing about 50 schools a year. As Chancellor, I announced a new 10-year programme to refurbish, rebuild 500 schools over the decade, so completely in line with what historically we've done in this country. On top of that, I announced record funding for schools, not just to help catch up our children with lost learning, £5 billion. It was an enormous amount invested in the largest ever tutoring programme that this country has seen. That was seen rightly at the time as the priority. Our kids' learning had been hugely disrupted by COVID. It was important that we helped them catch up, particularly the most disadvantaged pupils were the ones that were impacted the most. So I thought it was right also to invest in that, alongside just increasing the day-to-day schools budget back to the record levels that we had seen previously. So taking together very strong investment in schools, and now we're getting on with mitigating the issues that we're seeing today in a way that will help children quickly get back into the classroom.
OK, we'll try one more time to see if we can elicit a modicum of actual concern or responsibility.
Just finally on those mitigations, can you promise that schools will get all the money they need to fund things like transport to new classrooms or other costs to make sure that in the schools that are impacted, kids can go on learning in person and we won't have a return to remote learning that we saw during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, Chancellor's been crystal clear that schools will be given extra money for these mitigations. It won't come from their existing school budgets.
Is that more money from the Treasury or from the DfE?
That wouldn't be right. No, there'll be extra money to the schools, so the school budget won't be impacted by this. They will be given the extra money to deal with the mitigations. And again, just for context, our expectation is 95% of schools won't be impacted by this. And in the 50 or so schools that have already been mitigated, what we've seen is in the majority of cases, children continue to go to school. They're taught elsewhere on the school estate. And for those that do have to be home, that on average has been just for about 6 days or so. So hopefully people can get a sense that we can work through this relatively swiftly and we want to minimise disruption on kids' learning.
So here's Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson asking for some clarity.
Well, I don't think we can be confident we know the full picture, and that's the trouble. That's why this week in Parliament we want to force a vote to get the government to release the full list of all of the schools affected, and also to be clear about the timescale around this and why we haven't seen action sooner. I think a lot of parents will be concerned about what we're seeing, but even when mitigations are put in place, we know it's going to be incredibly disruptive. If children are going to have to move to alternative accommodation or to porta cabins or are stuck in classrooms with steel props holding up the ceiling. I mean, I don't think there can be a more defining metaphor for the last 13 years of Conservative government than children sat in classrooms with steel props to stop the ceiling falling in on their heads.
Let's go back to the underappreciated Gillian Keegan to see her getting shirty during the interview where at the end she asked for praise for basically ensuring kids aren't being killed by the Tories' total mismanagement of this situation.
It's not the job of the Department for Education, but we chose to do that because we wanted to make sure that we had that information centrally. On top of that, we wanted
Can I on that, sorry?
Yeah.
A school collapsed,
Yes.
and it took you 4 years to send out questionnaires to find out how many schools had RAC.
Now, we sent a warning out to the people responsible.
But you're saying that the government is not responsible, ultimately,
No.
for the safety of children in schools?
The school building's responsibility is with local authorities and multi-academy trusts.
Do you believe the government did everything
we
in
have-
its power?
but
Do
we've
you
taken
believe the
further
gov-
now.
Do you believe the government did everything in its power, has done everything in its power to make sure that children aren't being taught in schools that could collapse without warning?
Absolutely, because the responsible
You do?
bodies have that duty. What we have done since is we have basically said we want to have more information centrally.
Well, I mean,
So
I don't
that
think you should be congratulated on that. I mean, there are literally children.
I'm
going
not looking to
school.
be congratulated. I'm
There
just
are-
saying what we have done.
There are literally children who've been going to school in buildings that could have collapsed. Children could have been seriously injured. Children could have died. And only now are you assigning caseworkers and money to sort this
No,
out.
the responsible bodies have always been responsible for making sure they have surveyors, making sure they look at things like asbestos, have an asbestos plan, RAC, etc. They have a responsibility for the maintenance of their building.
And the cherry on the disaster cake is this.
I read in my Sun newspaper this morning that you spent £32 million refurbishing your offices, did you?
I don't know, actually. I didn't. I haven't done
Looks
it.
very nice.
Which offices?
Your offices, Department of Education?
Yeah, I know that when I was last in the department, I was on a different floor, and I know they are refurbishing some of them. But no, I wasn't
Best use of
involved in
funds
that.
at the moment?
Well, I wasn't. I don't know what I mean, I guess there's some maintenance requirements that they had on there. I wasn't part of that decision, to be honest. But I'll check when I get back. I know that I'm in a different floor than we used to be in. So I guess they're refurbishing aspects of the building. But of course, every part of the public estate needs to be refurbished and needs to be kept up to speed. In this case, I think it's really important to say that we have done something that we've never really done before, which is the responsible bodies normally
Not good
would do
optics,
this.
though, at the moment, is it? 32 million quid on offices when schools are crumbling.
I don't know what the condition of the offices. We could have been dealing with other issues within the offices, but I will look at it when I get back.
What a sham. A total disgrace. Click here for a video of Gillian Keegan talking about RAC to a dance track.